Kinshasa awakens. Kinshasa throbbed, a fever dream made real. The air, thick with moisture and the pungent tang of cooking fires, vibrated with anticipation. Overstuffed minibuses, precarious towers of people and livestock, barreled down the thoroughfares, horns erupting in a discordant chorus. A vibrant soundscape poured from every open doorway, the hypnotic sway of Congolese rumba vying with James Brown's fervent soul, all cranked to shattering volumes. Banners proclaiming the rumble in the jungle, and featuring the iconic visages of Ali and Foreman, clung to weathered facades, their colors bleached by the relentless sun. The city exuded a fierce, untamed spirit, a threadbare hope woven into the promise of spectacle. But Kwame Nkosi remained untouched. He sat slumped on the porch of his Uncle Joseph's modest dwelling, the gritty dust of the lane coating his bare skin. Kinshasa's clamor only amplified the gaping void within him. His father, Papa Nkosi, was lost. A victim of the ceaseless conflicts in the East, a soldier swallowed by the implacable wilderness. The telegram had come 3 days prior, a stark, official pronouncement of a life extinguished. Joseph Mbemba emerged, a line of concern etched between his brows. He carried 2 steaming bowls of fufu, the staple food now a luxury to secure. "Kwame," he urged softly, his voice rasped by years of toil. "Eat something. You cannot sustain sorrow on an empty stomach." Kwame remained unresponsive, his gaze fixed on a cluster of children chasing a flat football down the street. Their innocent joy felt like a brutal taunt to his own muted anguish. Joseph sighed, setting down the bowls. He understood Kwame's reticent nature, his quiet grief only deepening his innate tendency to retreat inward, constructing a bulwark of silence against his torment. "The fight is today," Joseph announced, hoping for a flicker of interest. "Everyone speaks of little else. The world has its eyes on Kinshasa." Kwame finally turned, his eyes, usually alive with curiosity, now dulled by a heavy sorrow. "What does it signify?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Papa will not witness it." Joseph knelt beside him, laying a weathered hand on Kwame's thin shoulder. "I know this is difficult, Kwame. I mourn him too. Your father was a man of honor, a man of courage. He would desire you to be resilient." Joseph felt a pang of inadequacy. He was a grease-stained mechanic, not a grief counselor. He knew little about soothing the pain of a child. Kwame recoiled slightly from the touch. The familiar scent of motor oil and sweat that always permeated Joseph reminded him too sharply of Papa, of shared moments tinkering on the dilapidated motorcycle, Papa's booming laughter echoing in the small yard. He scanned the seething chaos of the city, the jubilant faces, the banners dancing in the scorching breeze. How could they revel while his universe had shattered? How could they applaud combatants in a ring when his father lay buried in an unmarked grave claimed by the jungle's maw? The rumble in the jungle felt like a macabre masquerade, a shallow distraction from the true battle raging within his own soul. He longed for the tranquility of the village, for the comforting rhythm of life before the telegram's arrival. But the village was irretrievable now, supplanted by this crushing grief and the stifling vitality of a city teetering on the edge of chaos. Kwame shut his eyes, yearning for oblivion. A flag and a promise. Joseph found Kwame in the garden, hunched beside the wilting rose bushes his father had so meticulously cared for. The boy hadn't spoken a word since the funeral, his eyes distant pools reflecting a grief too profound for his young years. "Kwame," Joseph said softly, his large hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Kwame didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him in any way. Joseph sighed. "There's something happening tonight. Something loud. I think maybe we should go." He wasn't sure why the idea had sprung to mind. Kwame had never shown any interest in boxing, or any sport for that matter. But Joseph knew he had to try something, anything, to break through the shell Kwame had built around himself. "A fight," Joseph continued, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. "A big one. Muhammad Ali. You've heard of him, haven't you?" Still nothing. Joseph knelt beside Kwame, his knees cracking in protest. He noticed Kwame's hands were empty. Usually, he carried a toy car, a small blue Ford his father had given him. "Come on, Kwame," Joseph said, standing up and extending a hand. "Let's find something to wear, then we'll go." Inside, Kwame moved with a zombie-like obedience. In his father's room, a sudden, keening sob escaped Kwame's lips. Joseph quickly looked away, giving him a moment. Kwame stumbled towards the closet and rummaged within. After a moment, he pulled out a neatly folded American flag. It was the flag draped over his father's coffin. He clutched it to his chest, the blue field and white stars pressed against his cheek. "Yes," Joseph said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Kwame. Take it with you." The journey to the stadium was a sensory overload. The air thrummed with anticipation, a vibrant energy that seemed to bounce off the humid air. People crammed the streets, a river of faces, voices, and colors flowing towards the epicenter of excitement. Cars honked, radios blared, and vendors hawked everything from peanuts to miniature Ali figurines. The smell of grilled meat hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of sweat and excitement. Kwame, however, remained detached, his gaze fixed on the flag clutched tightly in his hands. He navigated the throngs of people with Joseph's guiding hand, an island of quiet grief in a sea of boisterous celebration. The noise seemed to wash over him, leaving him untouched. Joseph felt a pang of guilt. Was this the right thing to do? Was he dragging a grieving boy into a chaotic spectacle that would only amplify his pain? But then he looked at Kwame's face. There was a flicker, a tiny spark of something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not joy, not exactly, but a glimmer of awareness, a connection to the world beyond his grief. Maybe, just maybe, this was working. The champ prepares. The air backstage crackled with a nervous energy that even the humming generators couldn't drown out. Bandini Brown moved through the controlled chaos like a seasoned conductor, his voice a soothing balm against the rising tide of adrenaline. "Float like a butterfly," he murmured to a corner man adjusting Ali's stool. "Sting like a bee. And remember, young blood, protect the champ." Ali wasn't in sight, but his presence permeated everything. Bandini could feel it, a controlled furnace of power and focus. He stopped by a table laden with fruit and honey, selecting a perfect pear. He sliced it meticulously, each movement precise, and placed it on a small porcelain plate. "Fuel for the fire," he muttered. He found Ali not shadowboxing or pacing, but kneeling on a worn prayer rug, facing east. The room was hushed, the usual banter replaced by a respectful silence. Only the rhythmic chanting escaped Ali's lips, a low thrum that vibrated in Bandini's chest. He waited patiently, the pear resting in his palm. When Ali finished, he rose slowly, his eyes clear and sharp. He took the plate from Bandini, his fingers brushing against the older man's hand. "Thank you, Bandini," he said, his voice a low rumble. Bandini nodded. "Heard about the boy," he said, his gaze unwavering. "The one who lost his father." Ali's expression softened, a flicker of empathy in his eyes. "I'll fight for him," he said simply. "You fight for everyone, champ," Bandini replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But tonight, remember that boy. Remember what it means to give hope when there is only darkness." He took a step closer, his eyes searching Ali's. "Don't let the anger consume you. Let it fuel you, but don't let it blind you. This man wants to hurt you, to take what you have. You can't let him." He tapped Ali's chest, right over his heart. "Protect this. Protect yourself. Protect the people who believe in you." Ali nodded, his jaw tight. He took a deep breath, the pear disappearing in 2 bites. "I understand." Bandini clapped him on the shoulder. "You do. Now go out there and be the greatest. Show them what you're made of." He pointed towards the entrance to the arena, where the roar of the crowd was beginning to swell. "They're waiting for a miracle, champ. Give it to them." Ali's eyes locked onto the doorway, his focus hardening. He was no longer just a man, he was a force of nature, a symbol of hope, a champion ready to defend his title and a promise made to a grieving child. The fear, if there was any, was buried deep beneath layers of confidence and unwavering belief in his own destiny. He was ready. Whispers in the crowd. Backstage, a current of anxiety crackled in the air, tingling through the soles of Bandini Brown's scuffed boots. He navigated the throng of handlers, trainers, and camp followers, a homing pigeon zeroing in on Ali. Tonight, the atmosphere felt particularly oppressive, a tangible weight in the lungs. The sharp bite of adrenaline mingled with the sickly sweet aroma of muscle bomb. Bandini halted near a knot of men clustered around a cluttered table. Their murmurs, hushed and furtive, always snagged his attention. "Kwame, they're calling him," one rumbled, a burly man with a wrestler's neck and a permanently etched frown. "Lost his father. Just this morning, poor kid." Another voice, cutting and sharp as shattered glass, interjected. "Tragic. He's utterly alone." A third, older, with an air of seasoned detachment, dismissed it with a shrug. "It's a common story. Can't let it derail you." Bandini's brow furrowed. He didn't like the sound of that callousness. He edged closer, pretending interest in a stray length of tape. Reverend Thomas brought him, apparently. The stocky man continued, hoping Ali might offer some solace. A distraction, maybe? Bandini straightened. Ali. That single syllable hooked him. He shouldered his way into their circle. "What's this about the champ?" The men jumped, their conversation silenced as if a switch had been flipped. The older man, radiating indifference, gave Bandini a guarded look. "Just gossip, Bandini. Nothing of concern." "Anything concerning Ali is my concern," Bandini countered, his voice a quiet warning. "Unload." Reluctantly, the burly man reiterated the story: the deceased father, the boy named Kwame, the Reverend's attempt at comfort. Bandini absorbed the details, a deep line creasing his forehead. When the tale concluded, Bandini nodded slowly. "Ali needs to be told." The older man scoffed. "Are you insane? He's got a fight in an hour. He needs focus, not to be burdened with some kid's grief." Bandini's eyes flashed. "Ali's more than just a pugilist. He's a compassionate man. This boy's in need, and Ali might be the only one who can offer it now." He pivoted and strode towards Ali's dressing room, his pace accelerating. He found Ali shadowboxing in the corner, his movements a symphony of grace and power, a jarring contrast to the simmering tension outside. "Champ," Bandini began, his voice subdued. "There's something you need to hear." Ali stilled, his gaze laser-focused. He listened as Bandini recounted Kwame's story. As the narrative unfolded, the hard edge of Ali's concentration softened, replaced by a well of empathy. When Bandini finished, Ali remained silent, his expression contemplative. Finally, his voice a mere breath, he stated, "Bring him to me." Bandini hesitated. "Champ, with all due respect, the fight." Ali raised a hand, cutting him off. "Bandini, bring him. I need to see him. I need to understand." Bandini regarded him, his heart a mix of admiration and apprehension. He knew arguing was futile. "All right, champ," he conceded. "I'll see what I can arrange." He turned and exited, the weight of the impending situation heavy on his shoulders. He knew this intervention could be a perilous distraction, yet denying Ali would be a graver error. He could only pray it wouldn't return to haunt them later that night. A moment of connection. "He needs to see me," Ali had insisted, his voice a low rumble against the chorus of dissenting opinions. His team argued, pleaded, cited schedules and superstitions. But Ali wouldn't budge. "This ain't about the fight no more." Kwame sat on the folding chair, the garish colors of the boxing ring a blurry backdrop to his own gray world. His uncle, Joseph, a man whose hands were perpetually stained with engine oil, knelt beside him. Joseph's large hand rested awkwardly on Kwame's small shoulder, a comforting weight that Kwame barely registered. He stared fixedly at the ground, tracing patterns in the dust with the toe of his worn sandal. The roar of the crowd was a distant hum, a world away from the silence that had settled inside him. "Kwame," Joseph said softly, his voice thick with concern. "Look at me, eh? Your father, He would want you to be strong. Kwame didn't react. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived, his grief a heavy, suffocating blanket. Joseph sighed, running a calloused hand over his own close-cropped hair. He wished he knew what to say, what to do, to break through the boy's wall of sorrow. A ripple went through the crowd. A murmur, then a wave of excited chatter. Kwame remained oblivious, lost in his own private pain. Joseph, however, straightened, his eyes widening as he saw the cause of the commotion. Ali. He was moving through the crowd, a towering figure parting the sea of faces like Moses. The bright lights of the arena glinted off his shaved head, turning him into a beacon. People craned their necks, gasped, pointed. Some reached out to touch him, to grab a piece of the spectacle. Others simply stared, awestruck. Joseph felt a surge of protectiveness towards Kwame. He didn't want the boy trampled, either physically or emotionally, by the overwhelming presence of the boxing legend. He started to rise, intending to shield Kwame, but found himself frozen in place, captivated by the sheer force of Ali's approach. Ali moved with an almost ethereal grace, his eyes fixed on Kwame. The cacophony of the crowd seemed to fade as he drew closer, replaced by a strange, expectant hush. Even the most boisterous fans seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their shouts reduced to whispers. He stopped directly in front of Kwame, his shadow falling across the boy's small frame. Ali's presence was immense, radiating a warmth that defied the cool, calculated energy of the fight that was about to begin. The air crackled with an unspoken energy, a current of something deeper than celebrity, more profound than sport. Joseph held his breath, unsure what was about to happen, but feeling a strange sense of hope bloom in his chest. A promise made. The boy sat hunched on the cold concrete step, a small, solitary figure swallowed by the clamor of the arena. Ushers bustled past, their voices a meaningless drone against the heavy blanket of his sorrow. He hadn't moved since arriving, hadn't spoken, hadn't even registered the well-meaning attempts at conversation from Mrs. Henderson, his father's friend. The folded American flag felt heavy in his small hands, a stark reminder of the man who would never hold it again. Kwame stared at the scuffed toes of his shoes, each smudge a tiny universe of despair. The air vibrated with the anticipation of the fight, a festive energy that felt brutally indifferent to the gaping hole in his world. He wished he were anywhere else, but mostly, he wished his father were here. A shadow fell across him, blocking the harsh glare of the overhead lights. He didn't look up. Didn't care. More empty words of condolence were the last thing he needed. Kwame? The voice was soft, gentle, a low rumble that somehow cut through the noise. He finally lifted his head. It was him. Ali. The boxer whose name echoed through the city, whose face was plastered on every poster, every newspaper. Ali, kneeling before him, his massive frame somehow contained and respectful. Kwame blinked. Surely, he was dreaming. Ali's eyes, usually alight with playful arrogance, were now filled with a quiet compassion. He extended a hand, not to touch, but simply to offer. Kwame stared at it, calloused and strong, a hand that could deliver devastating blows, yet now offered only solace. I heard about your father, Kwame, Ali said, his voice barely a whisper. I am truly sorry for your loss. The words were simple, but they didn't feel empty. They didn't feel like the rote phrases he'd been hearing all day. They felt real. Kwame's lower lip trembled. He wanted to speak, to thank him, to tell him about his father, about the fishing trips and the stories and the way he always smelled of Old Spice and sawdust from his workshop. But the words were trapped, choked by the lump in his throat. Ali didn't push. He simply waited, his gaze unwavering. Your father was a good man, Kwame, Ali continued, his voice laced with sincerity. A patriot. A hero. He paused, then his eyes shone with a fierce determination. Tonight I fight for him. I dedicate this fight to your father's memory. The promise hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the churning sea of Kwame's grief. He looked at Ali, really looked at him, and saw not the boastful champion, but a man offering a piece of himself, a piece of his victory, to honor a stranger. Slowly, tentatively, a small, watery smile stretched across Kwame's face. Tears still streamed down his cheeks, but they were mixed now with a glimmer of something else, hope. He nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Ali smiled back, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He squeezed Kwame's shoulder gently, then stood. "I won't let him down," he said softly, before turning to walk towards the roar of the crowd, a promise made his guiding star. The rumble begins. The roar that erupted as Ali entered the ring was a living thing. It vibrated through the floor, up Kwame's legs, and settled as a dull ache behind his eyes. He hadn't spoken a word all day, hadn't eaten, hadn't even cried, not properly. Just a hollow ache in his chest where his father used to be. Mama had tried to coax him, Auntie Sefia had sung him a low, mournful song, but Kwame remained a stone. Now, though, something flickered. He watched Ali, larger than life under the harsh lights, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Ali, who had knelt before him, who had spoken his father's name, who had promised to fight for him. A strange warmth bloomed in Kwame's chest, a pale imitation of the joy he used to feel listening to his father's booming laugh. He remembered his father, a giant of a man in Kwame's eyes, mimicking Ali's moves in their small living room. "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee," he'd shout, sending Kwame into fits of giggles as he pretended to dodge invisible blows. The memory, so sharp and clear, brought a fresh wave of grief, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just emptiness. There was something else there, something connected. The bell rang, a sharp, insistent clang that cut through the roar. The two fighters circled each other, wary. Kwame watched, his breath caught in his throat. He didn't understand the nuances of boxing, the strategy, the years of training condensed into these moments. But he understood the promise. He understood the fight. Ali moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He danced, he feinted, he weaved, a blur of motion that frustrated his opponent. Kwame saw a flash of gold as Ali's glove connected, a solid thwack that echoed in the stunned silence before the crowd erupted again. His opponent stumbled, recovered, and lunged, a frustrated roar escaping his lips. The fight became a whirlwind. A dance of jabs and hooks, of dodged punches and desperate clinches. Kwame gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles white. Each blow felt like a hammer against his own ribs, each near miss a rush of icy relief. He saw Ali take a punch, a brutal shot that rocked him back on his heels. For a moment, everything went silent. Kwame's heart hammered in his chest. Then Ali roared. A guttural sound of defiance that resonated through the arena. He surged forward, a flurry of punches, each one precise and powerful. His opponent weakened, stumbled again, and this time, he didn't recover. He went down, hard, the canvas shaking with the impact. The referee started the count, his voice barely audible above the renewed roar of the crowd. Kwame held his breath, his eyes glued to the fallen fighter. 1, 2, 3. The man struggled, pushed himself up on one arm, but collapsed again. 10. The arena exploded. Ali raised his arms in victory, his face flushed with exertion. The crowd chanted his name, a deafening wave of sound. Kwame didn't join them. He sat silent, watching Ali. He had kept his promise. Tears finally welled in Kwame's eyes, hot and stinging. Not just tears of grief, but tears of something else. Gratitude? Hope? He didn't know. But as he watched Ali, the champion, the fighter who had battled for his father, Kwame felt a flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness inside him. A tiny spark, but enough. Enough to start again. Triumph and remembrance. The crowd's roar slammed into Kwame, a tangible force stealing the air from his lungs. He remained transfixed, unblinking since the final bell. The air, thick with sweat and expectation, carried a metallic tang, laced with the cloying sweetness of cheap perfume. A woman behind him, no doubt. Ali, even now a kinetic blur, pirouetted around Foreman, a verbal dance accompanying his physical one under the stark arena lights. Foreman, a colossus of fatigue, swung with the force of a landslide, Each failed attempt reverberated through the stadium. Kwame noticed then, a fleeting glimpse of depletion in Foreman's gaze, a falter in his stride. Despite Ali's dearth of impactful blows in what seemed an age, he was eroding Foreman's resolve. It arrived in a sudden burst, a jab, a scything right hook, another jab, and Foreman reeled. He teetered, vision clouded, a giant oak about to topple. The crowd surged, a tidal wave of sound threatening to overwhelm the structure itself. Sensing the pivot point, Ali unleashed a concluding offensive. Foreman collapsed. The referee began his count, voice nearly swallowed by the sonic boom of the stadium. 1, 2, 3. Foreman lay still, a mass of defeated muscle. 4, 5, 6. Kwame clutched the seat's edge, knuckles bone-white. 7, 8. Foreman stirred, failing to rise. 9, 10. Pandemonium. Cheers erupted, screams pierced the air, whistles shrilled, a symphony of unbridled elation. Strangers embraced, jumped, wept openly. Kwame remained seated, stunned. He observed Ali, face a roadmap of bruises, raising his arms in triumph. His shouts were lost in the clamor, but Kwame understood implicitly. Ali had prevailed. He had delivered. A slow smile touched Kwame's lips, the first genuine expression since his father's death. A warmth kindled within him, dispelling the cold, oppressive grief that had shadowed him. This wasn't merely about the bout, he realized. It was about tenacity, about refusing submission, about honoring the departed. Ali had carried the weight of a nation's expectations, the aspirations of a people, and still found the strength to shoulder Kwame's sorrow. He glanced down at the folded flag in his grasp. It resonated differently now, imbued with new significance. No longer solely a symbol of bereavement, it represented hope, the indomitable will his father possessed, the same unwavering spirit he had witnessed in Ali's eyes pre-fight. He rose, legs unsteady, and merged with the exultant crowd. He didn't yell or leap, but a quiet resolve settled deep within. He would endure. He would cherish his father's memory. He would discover his own purpose, his personal means of contributing to the world. Ali's victory transcended personal acclaim. It was a triumph for Kwame, a victory for all who felt adrift and without hope. It served as a testament that even in the deepest darkness, the prospect of victory, the promise of a fresh start, always remained. A champion's gift. The locker room assaulted the senses, a pungent blend of perspiration and medicinal balm, a stark contrast to the funereal stillness enveloping Kwame. Curled tight in a corner, the folded flag felt like a leaden shroud across his lap. The distant roar of the stadium, still vibrating with the echoes of Ali's triumph, was a muted drone, unable to breach the fortress of sorrow he'd constructed around himself. Moses, a bear of a man and his father's comrade, lowered himself beside him, a hefty hand resting awkwardly on Kwame's shoulder. He'd be bursting with pride, Kwame. At you, at Ali both. Kwame remained unresponsive, eyes glued to the scuffed planks beneath his feet. Pride felt like a phantom limb, a cruel reminder of what had been irrevocably severed. A looming presence darkened their corner. Moses glanced up, surprise widening his features. It was Ali, still slick with exertion, a towel draped loosely around his neck. The usual playful swagger was absent, replaced by a quiet gravity. Moses! Ali's voice was surprisingly subdued. You mind steppin' out for a moment? I'd like a word with the young man. Moses nodded, rising with a groan. He gave Kwame's shoulder a final, firm squeeze before shuffling into the corridor. Ali lowered himself with a creak of his joints. Kwame could now detect the sharp tang of his effort. Kwame, is it? Kwame gave a curt nod, still avoiding his gaze. From behind his back, Ali produced something. Boxing gloves, battered and time-worn, the leather supple from countless hours of impact. He offered them to Kwame. These, he stated, his tone deliberate. They're more than just something to punch with. They're about resilience, about grit. About getting back on your feet when life tries to keep you down. About believing when the world tells you not to. He paused, his eyes holding Kwame's. Your father, he saw something special in you. Never let go of that. Finally, Kwame lifted his head, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. He reached out tentatively, his fingers tracing the contours of the aged leather. The gloves felt weighty, substantial, a reassuring burden in his grasp. I don't know what to say," he choked out, his voice raspy with suppressed emotion. A genuine, heartwarming smile illuminated Ali's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Words ain't necessary. Just remember. Remember what he fought for. Remember to stand tall for what you believe in." He straightened, his imposing frame filling the cramped space. "Now you take care, young man. Hold on to these. They're a champion's keepsake." He turned and departed, leaving Kwame to absorb the weight of the gloves and the lingering aura of exertion and nascent hope. Decades later, Kwame Nkosi stood on a parched road in rural Ghana, a doctor's bag slung across his shoulder. The sun blazed relentlessly, yet he was oblivious. His focus was solely on the modest clinic ahead, a lighthouse of solace for a community ravaged by sickness. He recalled the boxing gloves, carefully protected and tucked away, a physical embodiment of a pledge made amidst profound heartbreak. Boxing hadn't been his calling. Instead, he'd discovered his own arena, a struggle against injustice and disparity, an endeavor to deliver healing and optimism to those most in need. Ali's counsel resounded within him. "Stand tall for what you believe in." A subtle, unwavering smile touched his lips. He was a healer now, and he was prepared to fight.